Okay, welcome everyone back for this evening. Tonight we're having Kathy Forty speak. Many people will remember from her presentation at the 2010 conference. Tonight she joins us again all the way from Los Angeles, California. Kathy has a BA in broadcast journalism and a doctorate in clinical psychology. Her change of direction came in 2003 when she had a suspected heart attack and was propelled through a tunnel vortex in what we'd call a near-death experience. Kathy will tell you about her key invention, the Trifinity 8. It is a technology that facilitates vibrational change on physical, emotional, mental and spiritual levels. So let's hear more about it from the inventor herself. Can we give Kathy Forty a lively ovation?
Thank you, Catherine. Welcome. It's good to be back in Aussie land again after all this time. I always wondered how weird can I get at different talks that I talk at. Last week I was talking at a group of physicists, and I was really glad to hear that I could get as weird as I could. So I'm going to say that this talk is going to be linear and non-linear at the same time. And I also like to start off with a disclaimer. I am not a scientist. I am a clinical psychologist, and a lot of things happen to me to propel me towards that way, which I'll talk to you about. Now, some of you, I don't know, how many of you were here for the 2010 when I talked? Oh, quite a bit. Well, there's a few things you'll hear that are same, and there's a lot of things as we go into the second half that aren't, as we go into rediscovering the ancient sciences and kind of tying this all together, and that's where some really cool stuff gets into play. But so everybody always wants to hear specifically what happened to you, Kathy. So back in 2003, I'll make this kind of brief, so because it's a fairly long story. But I was doing psychology at the time, and I was practicing one evening, seeing clients, and as I was leaving for the night, I was walking towards my car, and I had this whoosh feeling go right out of me, and with it became a profound sense of emptiness and feeling like I was done with my work here on earth as I knew it. Well, I didn't know what that meant. And I had the immediate thought, am I getting ready to die? And because I'm very goal-oriented. And I thought, well, what if I'm not getting ready to die and have to feel this way for maybe another 20, 30 years, whatever my lifespan is going to be? And that's not going to be very good. So I was thinking about this, and I went home trying to figure out what this feeling of profound emptiness came from. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't anxious about anything. My life was fairly normal at that time, very little stress. And when I went home to think about it, I sat down, and as I sat down, I started to see a swirling vortex in my head. And the next thing I found myself propelled through a tunnel, very fast, traveling at a high rate of speed, horizontal, feet first, and I could see light at the end of this tunnel. Now, I had heard people talk about the tunnel, and so, of course, my first thought was, oh, dear, I just died. And then I thought, well, what do I do now? There's not much I can do if I died, so let's just go see what it's all about. It's kind of interesting how this sense of calm comes over you, and but you also have some kind of strange thoughts that go through your head. And as I'm traveling towards this light, and I figured this is my time to see what this is all about, I was stopped. And I came to almost like a screeching halt right before I could go into the light. And I tried with all of my might, willing myself, my body to go forward into the light, but I could not go. There was like this wall right there. And I had the thought, well, this is boring. And as I thought that, all of this energy poured into me. It was like an implosion of energy, and I was spun back around as fast as could be, and voices in my head were saying, breathe, Kathy, breathe. And of course I was alone, so I knew these voices weren't from anybody I knew. Who were these voices? And I knew as clear as could be that my heart had stopped for some reason. I didn't know what I had, why it had stopped, but that these voices were trying to get me to breathe life back into my physical form. And as I got back into my physical body, my whole left side was paralyzed. I couldn't move. no one there to help me, but basically they just told me to relax, everything was going to be okay. They would reconnect me, and I could feel them and hearing the click, 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 click as each part was going into place. And when I was finally realigned with my body, still hearing these voices, mind you, I thought, oh dear, I've got this pressure in my chest, I need to see a cardiologist. And they said, no, you don't need to see a cardiologist, everything's going to be okay. Here I am, I'm still talking to voices, and I do this for a living for people who talk to voices. And I wondered what had happened to me. Well, anyway, the pressure in my chest did abate, but within 24 hours after returning to my physical body, I was obsessed with quantum physics. I was obsessed with everything from interstellar space travel to space quarks to energy to scalar to things I didn't even have an idea what they meant, but they were all going through my head. And I was getting up in the middle of the night between 3 and 4 a.m. every night, and I could not go back to sleep. And I was like, some force was propelling me to get on my computer and look at everything that was going through my head. And what was going through my head was unbelievable stuff, thoughts, concepts, and everything, number patterns. But as I went to look in the computer to research what I was hearing in my head, it was like I was being brought up to speed like Physics 101. I was understanding what I was reading, and but I was also being corrected in the background. Well, that's not quite accurate, but that's as far as your race has gotten. And, even some things which I'll explain later why we haven't gotten that far and why we're maybe have a misconception about that. So before I go any further, because everybody always asks, well, what were these voices? And I remember I was getting up every night and spending research time on this, and each morning I'd go back to work, not tired, and seeing my clients and feeling all of their emotions, something I hadn't experienced before, and something that's pretty uncomfortable when you feel it bombarded coming at you. So I knew something had changed. So I called a friend of mine, and who's a very gifted medical intuitive, and I just asked them to look behind the scenes what was going on with me. I'd called him on really difficult cases in the past with the client's permission, and he just wanted to, he didn't want to know anything but the person's name, a nice clean read, so nothing was being, he was not being influenced anything by what the facts were. So he took a long time, looked behind the scenes, and came back, and he said, well, Kathy, you almost died. He said, but the interesting thing is, he says, all your old guides have left. And that was that whoosh coming out of me. And that profound sense of emptiness, like I'd lost my whole family or my brethren. And he says, but you have a whole new set of guides now. They're very technologically oriented, very geeky. And my first question was, what do they want? And he said, well, they're showing me you came back. He said, this was a pre-contract, though. He says, you came back, and he says, you're supposed to invent some type of electronic, it looks like some type of medical device. And I laughed, and I said, oh, I don't know anything about inventing. And he says, well, they're showing me that it doesn't matter because they will point you in the right direction and help you in the process. And I finally said, I thought he was wrong. And I kind of dismissed it, but to make a long story short, it became my magnificent obsession. Something that you resist persists. And this was always in the back of my mind. I couldn't let go of it. And I started to ask, who were these voices talking to me? They identified themselves as the founders. They're eighth dimensional beings. It's a dimension, eighth dimension is a dimension of pure thought, a creation. It's an infinite place. It's a dimension where Christ energy is held in a dimension of service to others. It really is the highest plane of perception an entity can evolve to. So these beings said they were from the eighth dimension, that they were here instrumental in our evolution in the very beginning. They only came during key critical times in our evolutionary process. They were not involved in tampering or tinkering with our DNA, as we've heard stories along the line, but they could only help when we were at a pivotal moment in our evolution, which apparently we are right now. And that's why a lot of things are being seeded down. They have been seeded down, electronically, technology, physics, and so forth in the last 20 years to get us up to speed. They said, basically, your world is changing. And, you and I in here, we already know that. This was back in 2003. They said everything is being sped up, and you're going to be experiencing that. Now, this was quite a while ago, and they said that everything was shifting and that it was going to be very difficult for some people to navigate this energetic shift. That some people would be either experiencing total disruption in their life, maybe totally changing things, divorces, work. Some may even get chronic illnesses. They said some may be checking out of the planet. They may be having a harder time navigating it. We're all trying to keep up with how things are manifesting faster and the energetic flux of our current world today. They said this was part of your soul path. And so to make a long story short, again, I decided, okay, I was going to accept this, see where it led. I didn't have a clue where it was leading. But once I accepted that, okay, I'll see what I can do. I don't know anything about inventing, but I'll see what I can do. They started to tell me that everything, the secret to the universe is all about math. Of course, math was my worst subject in school. I may have gotten a doctorate in psychology, but I just eked by on the math components of all my graduate records exams because it was a foreign language to me. I just did not have that area in my brain turned on to math. And they suddenly told me it's now all about math, and I thought, oh, this is some cosmic joke, right? So sometimes life gives you your greatest gifts disguised as nightmares because on my path to learning about the math that encompasses our world, it shifted my own sense of where my part and connection to everyone else is, where we are right now. So all things that exist have a mathematical code. And we see them all, repeated sequencing patterns that resonate in all of nature. The ancients referred to it as sacred geometry, and they incorporated that into their most revered monuments. My guides instructed me that everything has a mathematical formula, even our DNA. In fact, our DNA is coded in instructions, and we needed to speak to it in a language it understood, which is math. So, in essence, it's our biological internet. It's the programming we have, whether we age, how our health is, what our appearance is, what we look like, and it's the age-old question, is God a mathematician? And because all the ancients knew everything ruled it, even in the 6th century BC, during the Pythagorean science of vibrational energies, they reduced everything to a number, one number. It's like, think of vitamin C, one number. Or anything else, love, one number. Numbers represent the principle and the innermost essence of the various manifestations of universal mind. So every object of being or thought represents a number of universal force, vibrations, and they're acting upon human consciousness and healing. So this is where I started. Now, I know somebody today's talked about sacred geometry, and I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty about that, into all the numbers and so forth, but just the sacred geometry part that they made me focus on, which was important, that sacred geometry was to be infused into this invention they were making me work at, which I didn't know where it was going, what it would look like. All they started doing was giving me certain components. And the very first component was the sacred geometry, okay? And then I learned about something called the golden mean spiral, and that it's the most powerful of sacred geometry for transformation and cellular healing. It's a measure of the creative forces. So the harmonics of all living organisms are governed by this golden mean principle. Pretty simple. You'll see its proportional geometry and growth patterns of leaves and nautilus shells and ram's horns and even the bones of the hands. It is the formula that influences the spiritual, the mental, the moral, and the physical regeneration commonly known as the mystic chemistry of the soul. So many people don't know that this golden spiral shape alone generates a frequency field in a computer of up to about 62 feet. Now, they've measured this. It's been verified by different physicists. It's the same frequency that's generated by the golden mean spiral that was found the magnetic waves in the frequencies of the king's chamber at the Pyramid of Giza. It's the frequency of life, and it represents the Christ consciousness grid of the human race. So, in fact, all the monuments on the Giza Plateau, which a lot of people don't know, they're all interrelated geodetically, and they all create golden angles. Multiple golden angles all over the place. So you have to think, what were the ancient Egyptians doing? Their golden angles and their math and all this sacred geometry was like our nuclear science and quantum, theory today. And so the pyramids, I think, are really kind of time capsules of everything the ancients knew about the universe, their science and math, and in the physics of the cosmos. So as we went into the sacred geometry, they started to tell me, and I knew about Hertzian waves and so forth like that because I had also incorporated in my clinical practice neurofeedback. I did brainwave training as well. So I understand Hertzian waves, and they said that's the old way of thinking. Hertzian waves are cycles per second. They're the standard norm in any measuring energy. They said, we're going to move away from Hertzian waves, and we're going to go straight to something called non-Hertzian waves, or subtle energy. And, these are the waves that are believed to be associated with health and the natural healing process. The term was first used by Nikola Tesla at the turn of the century, and he used it to describe this new form of energy. Einstein used it to distinguish energy which cannot be measured directly and like conventional electronic equipment and so forth. But this non-Hertzian energy is a higher dimensional energy. It consists of pure information patterns, numbers, math, and it mediates the communication between all the cells in the body. In fact, I like to call this non-Hertzian subtle energy instructional or informational waves, okay? And so they said, frequencies, everything, there's frequencies in the world, but there's a faster route into things, and that is the math instruction, giving it directly to the body. So what happened was I started out channeling. I hadn't done channeling work, but I had to sit down and for over a year channel over 5,000 different properties. And I'm talking about everything from elements and solids and liquids and herbs and minerals and emotions and symbols and things I had never seen, very strange kind of off-planetary symbols. But they said our DNA would understand what those symbols meant. Concepts and formulas, gems, everything. And also they made sure that everything that I did had the mathematical algorithm infused in it of pure water. It was very, very, very important that water, as a carrier wave of energy, be in there. So this mathematical, because people say, how did this happen? Well, sometimes things came down to me in whole downloads. Sometimes I would hear them talk, and sometimes I'd get pictures. So it came in 3 different ways. And what they would show me was, I would think of maybe the concept of, vitamin C. I mentioned that earlier. And they would show me the number sequence of vitamin C. Sometimes it would be a few numbers. Sometimes it would be many numbers. So it wasn't like always one particular number for anything. So this mathematical substance coding was then compressed into numeric binary code, zeros and ones. That takes the old information that's born within your DNA and helps to rewrite it. Now, binary code is a language of computers. So any of you who are computer techies out there, right away, zeros and ones can give a whole of a world of information. And, it's not something we invented. The Egyptians had binary code back then, and the Egyptians said that they got it from the star people. So we know that zeros and ones are the language of the cosmos. And we may think we invented it, but that's not true. Okay, so as I said, we had pure water. It facilitates the information to the body. And the next thing they talked about was sounds, how important sound was. Now, sound is a frequency. That's the only thing that's different than math. Sound is used as a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious world. It's the quickest way into the energy field. So music is a carrier wave of information sent to the body, and it regenerates it. You know, when I was, about 10 years or so ago, I was roller skating, and I tell this because this is a good story exactly about how sound worked, and I kind of knew intuitively back then. And I have to admit, I was kind of a hotshot roller skater, and I was roller skating backward in a very crowded rink, and somebody fell behind me, and I had to, my hand went down so I wouldn't fall over them, and it took a break, a really bad break in the navicular bone, if any of you know bones, and that's the bone every doctor says, oh, that bone, that takes 6 months to heal, not 6 weeks like other bones. And so I didn't want to do this. I did not want to spend 6 months in a cast. So intuitively, I knew that I needed sound. Don't tell me how, but sometimes our memory banks are filled with information. We don't know where it came from, but it's remembering. So what I did, if some of you haven't heard this story, was I found the most inspirational music I could find, which at the time was the Chariots of Fire album, Vangelis. I always don't know how to say that, Vangelis, whatever. And I got an X-ray of my hand to the bone, and I used whiteout over the crack in the bone so I could always look at it healed. My doctor thought I was crazy for asking for it. I put it up on my mirror in my bathroom so I could always see it whole. And I put my speaker on the floor. I had a big speaker during that time. Put it flat on the floor, put my hand on the floor, on the speaker, put a little crystal. That also came into my mind. You must put a crystal in your hand. Put a crystal in my hand, because I had one, and put my hand on the speaker, and I immediately started playing the music, and I could visualize myself swimming, climbing mountains, leading as a beacon of light this hand already healed. You know, I saw it as healed. And as I was doing this, heat was shooting up and down this arm. I didn't know what that meant, but I figured it can't be bad. And I would do this like for 30 minutes each day. And, you know, if somebody asked me, this is really important, if somebody asks you, when is it going to heal, don't go into your whole, story about, well, the doctor says 6 months and poor me and everything else. I would just say any day now. Because I did not want to destroy the programming I was trying to put into place. And so at the end of 4 weeks, I went back to the doctor, and he said, usually at that time they take the cast off, they x-ray it and see how you're doing and usually slap another one on. And he came out after taking the x-ray, and he goes, and he was kind of shaking his head, like perplexed. And I said, it's healed, isn't it? And he says, well, it looks really good. But I know these bones. They don't heal that fast. And so he slapped another cast on, and I went back thinking like, so I kept doing my little visualization with the crystals and the Vangelis and so forth like that. And within a week's time, I was getting dreams that it was already healed, so I cut the cast off, which I'm not telling you to do. And that's the first time in my life I've ever bucked what a doctor has told me to do. But I knew with a certainty that it was healed. And I took it off, worked with an exercise ball for a day, and I've never had any problems since, ever, with that hand. So I knew sound was a key component in any type of healing. So when my guide started to tell me that you must incorporate sound, I said, oh yeah, I understand that. So I think they may have been prepping me for this whole experience prior to this, that I would come on board. So, and most people don't know, sound is the first sense to develop in utero, and it's the last sense to go when you die. So sound is very, very important. But not just any sound. We're not talking about hard rock, hard metal, anything like that. They said sound, specific sound. And they started to talk to me about something called solfeggio tones. Never heard of it. And these are specific frequencies. They strengthen the transmission of digital data to the cellular system. Now, these solfeggio tones were used in ancient times in the Gregorian chants, in the temples, and they set up a resonance in the body to allow healing to start to take place. But then they were conveniently lost by the Catholic Church. They went into some, dark cave somewhere, and a guy named Dr. Joseph Paleo reintroduced them probably about 10, 15 years ago. And they were rediscovered, and now you hear a lot about solfeggio tones. But back in 2003, I didn't know very much at all about that. These assist in opening up the channels and staying open and keeping the life force, flowing through the whole chakra system. And if you look at these numbers, I think they're really interesting here. Oops, here we go. There we go. It's like, all right. Each of these numbers equals to either a 3, 6, or 9. Let's take 5, 2, 8. 5 and 2 is 7, 7 and 8 is 15, 1 and 5 is 6. All of them equal to 3, 6, and 9. You say, well, what does that mean? Well, 3, 6, and 9 are extremely key. At least my guides told me that multiples of 3 are very, very powerful in the energetic world. So if you're doing anything, do it 3 times. It's not like you've got OCD or anything like that. But 3 times it cements it in, it sets up a resonance. And in fact, Nikola Tesla, the great Nikola Tesla, the inventor, and I don't have to tell any of you guys who he is, I'm sure you know. He said if you only understood the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, you'd have the keys to the universe. So they do serve as portals into other dimensions. I'll leave that little thought with you. All right. So the next thing they started to talk about was something called fractals. Fractals. I'd never heard of fractals either. So it was like school 101 going back. And fractals are like holograms, and they're like I always say they're like those Russian matryoshka dolls, a doll within a doll within a doll within a doll within a doll to infinity. All parts contain the whole, but there might be just slight differences. And if you zoomed into any one part, you'd see the whole again. And so fractals, when you put them together with math, which is interesting, it amplifies the information coming through. So they were more concerned with the fractals, even though it creates a fractal field, which is an energetic field that sometimes people coming up to our devices will feel this as, whoa, that just kind of drew me in. It's not just the picture, but I felt something. They amplify the information. And then the whole thing now in the holographic universe and the science of fractals, it's called the new science of life in essence. It's an infinite, non-destructive, perfect compression of these fractals creates what they call phase conjugation, which is oneness. The yogis call it oneness. So, you see these fractals in everything. If you look around you, you're going to see them. As I say, we live in a fractal universe. Fractal patterns are seen everywhere in nature, rivers, on land, ice crystals. You'll see them in the trees and leaves and pine cones. Actually this is interesting because I started to pay attention to trees, and when a tree was in trouble, a tree was diseased, it had something wrong with it, the fractal pattern on the tree would go chaotic. So it almost made me wonder, can I feed back some type of corrected fractal pattern, and would it actually get better? Well, I don't have the definitive thing on that yet, but that's an interesting thought. So you also are going to see this in animals or even our insects. I mean, nature is beautiful, these repeated sequencing patterns. And, of course, in the beautiful seashells that display these spectacular, more than not only the color, but the so forth. And even in the food we eat, we see these fractal patterns. Notice how it's all healthy food. These are greens and vegetables up there, vibrant and fresh. You will not see a fractal pattern in a junk food. So, and if you do find one, let me know, because I have yet to see one. So, again, we're going to see this in plants and flowers and growth. So start looking around. You're going to see this. If we study them, they're like infinite universes within each petal. And the most important thing is that even our veins and capillaries inside the human body are fractal. So, when you ask again, is God a mathematician? Something is going on here. What does this all mean? So, I started to think about it, and so I eventually wrote a book on fractals of God. And I started to think if we are all, as all religions say, made in the image and likeness of God, we are all fractals of God. There's God in each one of you, whether you call it God or source, whatever your religion, whatever your thinking is on that. We are all one. Everything is a part of the same part into multiplying. So it lets you something to think about, these fractals. And of course, if you go over to our booth tomorrow, you'll see some of these moving and animated, What we do is we play our mathematical codes behind the fractals. Some people go up and say, am I generating that fractal? No, you're not generating that fractal. Although that fractal may be filled with wonderful sacred geometry. It's got codes playing behind it, playing alongside of it, just to, I say, kind of shake hands with it and amplify that information coming through. Okay, so now we've got a few different components that are coming down, all these fractals and sound and algorithms. And so I'm thinking, well, how does this all work? How do we give this to the body? What's the transmission of it? That was a real dilemma for me. I just couldn't figure out how to do this. And then all of a sudden they showed me this picture of Superman. It's kind of, they look what's already in your memory bank that they can relate to, and so it's not so totally foreign. And I thought, oh, Superman crystals. Superman's up in the Fortress of Solitude, and he's downloading this information about his race and where it's going and so forth like that. And I thought, it's kind of a strange idea. Crystals, they want me, how do I connect crystals to the computer? I didn't quite figure that out. And so it took almost a year, 6 months actually. It took 6 months to find somebody that would grow these crystals, because they told me they need to be grown. You can't go to a New Age store. You can't pick up crystals willy-nilly. They had to be grown in a lab, in an autoclave. Started with a little silicon dioxide seed crystal and then added silicon dioxide because it had to be perfectly clear. Because information with a crystal, if there's flaws in it, that information can slow down. So you need it to be perfectly clear, so it just takes it and immediately lets go of it to wherever it's going, transmits it. There's no roadblocks or stumbles along the way. And I thought, well, this is kind of a strange idea. But then they led me on the computer to look at this picture. And this is the Hadron Super Collider in CERN, Switzerland, where they're using a particle accelerator to split open looking for the tiniest and tiniest and tiny until they find the God particle. They think they found it, but my guides laughed and they said they're not going to find it because it's like a fractal. It goes on and on and on to infinity. There is no end to it. So at least that'll keep a lot of physicists in business for quite a long time. So at the same time they told me about this, that I was being told about crystals, the transmission, I learned that in one of the devices at the CERN, Switzerland, they use over 60,000 of these crystals, much like they were showing me, to be used in their electromagnetic photon spectrometer. Now, interesting, crystals talk to each other when more than one is used. Now, this I did not know. And that if you put another crystal, a same-size crystal, in the same place as another one, they will start to oscillate together. And they're kind of plugged into some collective field by which they can communicate with other crystals. It's an oddity, but in fact, I had a friend that used one of our devices and put her crystals near it when information was coming through. She had two like tower crystals. They were perfectly clear. And she says within an hour after doing that, they were cloudy. They took in the information. She said it took a couple days for them to get clear again, to let go of that. But see how crystals, they immediately want to come in and start taking in information. So it appears by these crystals that even the scientists CERN Switzerland and probably other scientists know that crystals are a great way of using to transfer information, communication. And of course, you know, all of your electronic devices out there have crystal components in them. You know, so you need that to make it work and to get a piezoelectric charge. So, okay. So these are the crystals I finally came up with. And they said it was very important that they be double terminated, meaning that they're both pointed at each end, sort of like a little pyramid on top, a little pyramid on the bottom. So one could take information, send it through, and send it out. Okay? And another thing, they said, well, you're going to need what we call a signal box. They didn't use quite that terminology, but I got the picture. Because if you're taking something from a digital signal, crystals like an analog signal, and the human body likes an analog signal. And it's a softer effect on the body. Of course, we live in a digital age, and I'm thinking, well, why isn't everything digital? Nope, it gets a much clearer picture if it goes from digital to analog. So I had to go binary code to from digital to analog. So sometimes you feel in crystals when they're turned on and information is coming through them. You'll feel maybe a tingling, a pulsing, a sense of warmth. Sometimes you'll feel energy shooting up your body like I did when I had my roller skating thing. And that tells me there's blockages. I didn't know that back then, but if you're working with a crystal and you start to feel heat coming up and it's like an explosion of heat in some little places, it means it's trying to clear the energetic pathways, that there's blockages there. So quartz crystals obviously act as oscillators and they store lots of information. So how can we use these crystals? All right, well, the whole thing was like a really journey for me. People can place them on their body. You know, I've had people, use it and they come off and go, oh, how Atlantean of you, which we'll talk about a little later as we get more into the ancient scientists, or just briefly, I haven't got to the really strange stuff yet. Okay. They can be placed on meridian points in the body. Let's say that maybe you have a cold or flu. You can place them on your lung meridians. And the crystals will find a way with their energy to start to clear those pathways. So when you think about it, human cells are liquid crystals. You and I are transmitting and receiving information all the time. Just like you thought, oh, I was just thinking about that person, and then they called. Well, it's because we are liquid crystals. We are getting information from the ethers all the time and trying to analyze and decipher it. The human body is composed of millions of these crystals. All right, so after the crystal thing, many of you probably have heard of Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief. My guides were telling it was very important to infuse intent into the device. Now, that was their department because I didn't know what intent needed to be in there outside of maybe some feminine energy instead of male energy like a lot of devices out there. I really didn't understand totally what they meant until I had the experience of, my sister lives in Bali, and she was home to Chicago. We were visiting relatives for a birthday, and she came in, and she was doing pretty bad. She had what they call some Bali bug, and what it's like, you've got a fever, and every bone aches in your body, and you just have no energy, But she came, she rallied herself because it was an 80th birthday of my aunt. And she came in and she really couldn't do anything. And I said, well, let's experiment. Can you just try and get on with the crystals and we'll send some information to you and see what some specific information for your immune system and so forth like that. So she was game. She got on it. She laid down and held the crystals, and I went into the other room, and an hour later she came back out into the kitchen, and she goes, okay, she looked very perky, she goes, let's go do the Art Institute Museum in Chicago. And I was really amazed because I thought, how can this be so fast? And I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah, I feel great. And I said, I still wasn't, how could she have made such a turnaround so quickly? I just couldn't compute that. I said, did you do anything differently when you went on? And she goes, all I said was, I am open to healing. And that's it. You ask your guides, I'm open to healing. You submit to the higher process of asking for help. And she did. And it was like, wow, her guides must have gotten in there, helped her out with the, in all the things that they could. And it was a miraculous thing for me to watch. And it told me about the power of it. And I always like to back that up with one of my clients. If any of you read my blog, I have a weekly blog that one is about the miraculous healing of someone named Valerie. But Valerie was somebody I had as a client many, many years ago. In fact, she was one of my very first clients. Before I started in private practice, I was in a community mental health setting. And she was assigned to me. And Valerie had multiple personality disorder. Of course, her file did not say that. Nobody had diagnosed her as that. But, I don't want to go into her whole history, but, she had been multiply abused before the age of 7 by multi-generations, sexually, emotionally, physically, you name it. Something horrendous, a life you never want to even consider for anybody. And because of this, she split off and made different altars so that she wouldn't destroy herself and go crazy, totally crazy. It happened to somebody else. It happened to that altar. It happened to that one out there. It didn't happen to me. I'm safe. Nobody ever hurt me. That was the thinking. So whenever I'd have to go to... the doctor would ask if I would go to the OBGYN with her, any appointment, because sometimes little altars might come out and think they're being abused. So it's not something I normally did with clients, believe me, but she didn't have any family in the area, and believe me, none of her family would want to go and do that with her anyway. So I did, so I could keep one of the basic altar host personality, the adult one, out for the exam, and the little ones safely inside the system and not, there during the physical exam. And when the doctor did tests on Valerie, everything showed up that she had cervical cancer. But yet if one of her teenage altars, which was not traumatized by the doctor, if that altar happened to be out at the same time, there would show absolutely no trace of cervical cancer. And they repeated this test many times. Same thing. This altar is out, no cancer. This altar is out, cancer. So, you have to start thinking about how powerful the mind is and how compartmentalized it can put things to make things that you start to think that way. So that taught me to start thinking outside the box. She was one of my greatest teachers in that, and so I think she was priming me for some of the stuff that would come. So what happened when we put it all together? Okay, these mathematical algorithms, the sacred geometry, the solfeggio sound tones, the fractal power, the crystal rods, transmission and intent, all parts came together into a software-based system. Believe me, I didn't know this was where it was going. But had they given me all of it at once, I probably would have run screaming in the opposite direction because, being overwhelmed by where this, and it took 5 years to develop this, by the way. So they wanted it to be called Trinfinity 8. Trinity and infinity merged, and the sign of the 8, which is usually a regeneration symbol in there. So as we started into this, that there would be 72 different programs. And I got some leeway in this. I got to ask my friends their wish list, what some of the things they wanted. So we got in some anti-aging stuff and everything like that. But basically it was physical, emotional, spiritual, rejuvenation type things, that something for everyone, to shift the body into a higher vibrational state where then all healing was possible. Now I always say, I don't talk about cures. You guys cure yourself, you know that. But sometimes you need to be put into a place where healing is most conducive, and that's what we're talking about. So, we thought, well, what does this do? Okay, well, first of all, I didn't know what it would do. I had to find out through a lot of our practitioners what it would do. We first brought it to a conference of subtle energy researchers, and I just put it out there and said, try it. Tell me what because I didn't know. This is the first time anybody had seen it. And I had a very interesting experience. Many people would come off the device either doing everything from channeling dead people to seeing guides to having just unusual experiences. And the people who stood around it watching would say, this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing sharding coming out of the body. I'd look over and say, oh, it's playing release emotional blockage. Oh, now we're seeing beautiful plumping coming out of the body. I'd look over, and what was playing was, balanced energy centers and so forth like that. So I knew something was coming together. So what we found out was that it could help release traumas of the past, especially like working with heart resonance. We have one of those heart resonance which helps to give and receive love and forgiveness. So we started working that with couples, and we find little things would percolate to I wished I had this when I was still doing therapy, but I retired my practice to work with this obsession. And it allowed emotional release to come easier. It gave them new hope, especially with suicidal clients. Or if they left them with less reactive emotional triggers. How about physical vitality? Pain. Pain was a good one. It allowed pain we had people working in sports in Canada. We have a coach does Olympic training. And I have to say, one of my people who's in the military, she's in the reserve, she uses it for her military tests or physical exams. And every time she uses it before she takes exams, she says she tops her last exam. And she's in her 50s now. So it increases energy, libido. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But focus and clarity, for ADHD, for exams and so forth, libido. Erectile dysfunction, we've had many reports that have cured that too. Yes, it's always good to know. Spiritual connection. People would talk, coming off this device after a while of using it and saying they felt a clear connection to source, or they started to go towards more higher vibrational foods, or they started to get more interested in energy, or the things that areas that they probably never had much of an interest before. And we'd hear this mostly from their family members first who were observing this, They became more intuitive. In fact, there was one person that was originally on it, and he said, he came off actually with tears in his eyes, and I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, yes, he said, I'm a medical intuitive, and this is somebody I didn't know. And he said, I saw my guides fine-tuning my intuition like a radio dial. And he says, and then I saw all these guides come forth that were responsible for this device. Now, he had no idea about the background of this device. And he said, all these beings, that there's quite a number of them. And he says, and then I saw a man who identified himself as your father, and he said he just wanted to let you know he was proud of you, and it was money well spent. Well, my parents both died my father died 3 months after I had my near-death experience, and my mother died about a little over a year later. And it was a prearranged departure so that they could leave me funds at that time so that I could develop this and see where it went. And believe me, I didn't know where it was going to go. I thought, dear God, do not send me on a fool's mission, this folly that, I'd have to pretty much tell my friends, oh, yeah, I'm still doing therapy work, because I knew they'd say, oh, poor Kathy, she's gone off the deep end doing some strange, energetic project. But, it started to pay off in the fact of what people were experiencing. Burns. I would get things from nurses. This particular one on top here, which is interesting. She went to a movie theater and she had a metal popcorn bowl. I don't know what metal popcorn bowl you get at any movie theater, but this was somewhere in San Antonio, Texas. She put it on her arm and it burnt it. It was one of those you eat in movie theaters, And 12 hours later, and she said there was no pain. It was excruciating pain here, no pain here. Here's somebody else. This is before she had done any type of treatment. And this is 48 hours after. It's almost gone. So we are starting to see, okay, not only that. So I provided a couple pictures today because we don't get too many, that we can always share here because some of them are personal. But this is somebody who had cold sore herpes. And after one session, 15-minute session, by the next day it was totally clear. Of course, her patient, she was already gone, so the practitioner couldn't take a after picture the next morning. But she called to say it was totally gone. Here, eye changes. We see things actually change in the eye. Now, remember, this is all math, which is incredible. All math is just doing this. Information. This is someone with Lyme's disease, and it's 2 months' time. And, the doctor wrote, all of these are very weak fibers and a very big pupil, and this says that it's too weak to contract to light when a light flash has gone off. And we see there's discoloration around here, inflammation and so forth like that. And afterwards, these fibers are much stronger. The eye is able to contract like it normally is, less inflammation. Of course, I said, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. How does the patient feeling? That looks good in the eye, but what does that mean? And she reported she wasn't, Lyme's disease can be pretty debilitating. And of course, I don't know what it's like here, but in America, it's spread all over Lyme's disease only because it's now a biological weapon. Off of Connecticut, old Lyme, Connecticut, there is an island called Plum Island, and where they're working with biological warfare, and they're using ticks and limes, and they got out into the public. And they're not, they don't advertise this, but everybody knows that the Lyme's disease of today, at least in the United States, I don't know if it's traveled to Australia, but it is the most tenacious to try to get rid of that. And we have one doctor that does nothing, she's a naturopath, does nothing but see Lyme's patients, and has found a way to treat it effectively. So we to actually make a person, because most of the time they feel like they can't move, their life is, it's really turned upside down with this disease. Okay, so what else are we seeing? Gray hair. This was very strange. We started to see when people would do some with hair programs that they would either notice gray hair coming in on the shaft or at the very root. Now, I think on the shaft is a very weird place to start, but this was what we were seeing. In fact, one woman said she had this beautiful, white, snow-white hair, and she called me complaining that it was actually turning dark. And she said, at first I thought it was my imagination, but my hairdresser pointed out to me, what are you doing? Your hair is starting to turn dark again. And so I asked her, well, what programs are you doing if you're not doing any type of hair programs? She said, I'm just doing the adrenal programs, doing something to balance my adrenals. And I thought, well, once when your adrenals are off balance, that's how you get premature graying. And as her adrenals were stabilizing, somehow her hair started turning darker. Go figure. So we don't always know why things happen. In the area of rejuvenation, I always say, okay, I know this woman's got more makeup on in the right side, but she said it totally. This was a naturopath in Beverly Hills. She gave me permission to use this. And she said, I totally, 6 weeks, doing nothing different. I just totally lost weight. I found myself eating differently. And she said, I started feeling vibrant. So, of course, I changed my hair color. She said, men were coming on to me. She said, I've never felt so good. And so talk about rejuvenation. Of course, I always tell people, they usually don't believe me anyway, but I said, listen, why would I lie that I'm older? I am 62. And I am going to be 63 in a few months. And I know that it has totally slowed down my aging process. And I owe that to math. I owe that to the universe. I owe that to my guides. And I kind of jokingly say, in that tunnel, they must have said to me, Kathy, if you take on this project, we will let you look young. And I must have said, yes, I'm in. All right. So I was curious, what is this doing in the body? We obviously can see physical changes. But what's happening in the DNA? Is anything happening in the DNA? And so I put that to the test to a DNA research lab. And they take liquid placenta DNA and human placenta DNA. And they took 3 of our programs. They asked me to choose 3. And I took telomere and DNA repair. That was one. The other one was reverse anti-aging. Another one was divine alignment. I didn't expect divine alignment to have any DNA repair, but I put it in there anyway, just out of curiosity. And so what they did was they used, they called excitation type of frequencies in that, and they put the crystals above the liquid placenta DNA, because once you put the crystal in the DNA, it changes the variables. So they had to suspend it over. And they subjected it to these different frequencies and found that, that there was significant electrical correlations, or what they called electrical conductivity. And that was associated with the DNA's ability to repair itself. It was significant enough, and the one they found it was really significant on was reverse aging, one of our programs. So we said, okay, let's do more reverse aging. Okay, so I don't want to go into, I'll just bring one other thing up, which this was interesting because Rasuna Alston from Interglow Health Products happened to come to America and to North Carolina at a bioenergetic conference, and she was doing her thing in her booth, her stall. Excuse me, we call it booth in the United States. Stall sounds better. And this guy on the other side of the room was doing all this testing, but we didn't know that. He was testing the people on our device on the other side to see what was going on. And of course, he was testing some other people too. So eventually he called me over and he said, what do you got in that device? And I said, why? He says, because I'm getting some really interesting results I haven't seen before. And he said, he showed me this, and he said, I've got a lot of them like this, but I want to show you. Here's a man that came to me. He's 68 years old, but he's showing us 76 years old, okay? And this first one here is cardiovascular. The green is autonomic nervous system. The yellow is central nervous system. Pink is psycho-emotional. And red is overall health. So this was the baseline. So he did one session, 15-minute session, and they all went up overall by 36%, which was pretty good. He said, that's a pretty good start for just a 15-minute session. So then he wanted to see if it held, which was a great idea. The next day, the next morning, he retested this guy to see if it held. And actually, as energy does, it gels and continues to work. That's why we say, people watch. Maybe, a couple hours later, 24 hours, it went up by 42%. Okay, so then he decided to do another session that day, a 15-minute session, and it went up to 48%. Well, then he decided to try some other device, which I won't mention the name, and it went down to 44%, and he wasn't happy with that. So he went over to Rasuna and said, I want you to put the device on intense now to see what would happen. And he put it on intense, and it went up to 67%. And Dr. Michael Kessler, who did this results, said he had never seen this before, so it's interesting. I kind of pulled this out because this is what we get a lot. All right, so let's start moving into the quantum potential. If any of you are familiar with David Bohm, he first talked about the quantum potential energy in 1952, the year I was born. It was a good year. A lot of good people were born in that year. It relates to the unbroken wholeness of the entire universe. So we find everything is interconnected. Transmission of information is greater than the speed of light. Okay? That suggests that we are unlimited, and what we create simultaneously, and we share it simultaneously. And so we are moving, we're already there, but we've been moving into the super quantum potential. Now, this is a level a bit above the regular quantum potential that resides beyond the ordinary four-dimensional space-time. It's like quantum potentials, okay? It's a higher dimensional level. And beyond that is an even more subtle energy called the spiritual energy level. And this is what I believe that many of the devices coming through now, and they said lots of new devices would be coming through to help shift people during this time. So it's not just MAR devices. There's a lot of devices out there that were helping devices to help people shift during this time and to speed up through the internet, because we are one global mind, just like the internet, although there's a lot of garbage on it. That we needed that to process information faster and to be connected to each other. sort of like the fractal universe. So that got us on the idea back then that maybe, everything was turning wireless. Maybe everything that we could do with healing could be wireless as well. So this was kind of a remarkable event that took place at the University of Paris. It's a research team led by a guy named Alan Aspect. And he performed what I think may be one of the most key things of the experiments of the 20th century, at least. Him and his team discovered that under certain circumstances, subatomic particles, such as electrons, are able to instantaneously communicate with each other regardless of the distance separating them. So it doesn't matter whether they're 10 feet or 10 billion miles apart. They could still, because, and this was replicated in 1997 by another guy named Nicholas Giesen, he concluded that they were communicating at a mind-boggling speed of 20,000 times the speed of light. So the reason these particles are able to remain in contact with each other regardless of distance and time and space and everything is not because they're sending some mysterious signal between each other. It's because they're separate, because separateness is an illusion. At a deeper level, we are all connected to each other, like a holographic fractal, like I said. Each part contains the whole. So I started to think about how I could do long-distance healing. And remember, this is back in 2003, 2004, or something like that. So they showed me, and so I'll show you in a minute. But I used my aunt. I always talk about my aunt. She died last November at the age of 90, but she was a good guinea pig throughout her run for this. And so she had just gotten out of the hospital. She had a hernia operation. This was, when she was in her 80s. And I called her, and she goes, I just called the doctor. I made another appointment to see him on Monday because my stitches are all inflamed. They're red. I think I've got an infection. And she was really worried about it. And I said, would you like me to send you some healing energy? I was starting to think about how I could send her something. And she said, yeah, sure, fine. She thought I was going to pray for her. She's Catholic. And because she never understood any of this stuff. Well, maybe she understood a little bit more when she died at 90, but not back then. And so I put a whole hour program on thinking well, she's a long distance. I'm in LA and she's in Chicago. So I better make something to make sure she really gets it. And so I put an hour-long program on things like, immune system boost and detox and, all these type of things, inflammation, swelling, and sent it to her on a Sunday afternoon thinking, I don't know if she's going to get it, receive it, anything. She didn't know I'm going to do this. So I called her Monday evening thinking that she'd been to the doctor already, and I said, well, what did the doctor say? And she goes, well, I canceled the doctor. And I said, well, why'd you do that? And she says, well, it was the darnest thing. She says, I just got back from playing bingo with the girls. See, even sick or not, nothing would stop her from playing bingo in the basement of the Catholic Church. And she got home, and she decided to take a shower. And as she was getting out of the shower, and this is actually right around the time I was playing the device long distance to her, she said, all of a sudden out of nowhere, it was like I was getting all these flu-like symptoms, It's like, she said, I thought, oh my God, now I'm getting sick on top of it. And she said, I felt really tired, which is a detox reaction. She said, I decided to lay down. And as she did lay down, she thought she would take a 10-minute nap. And that 10-minute nap turned into an overnighter for her. She didn't wake up till the next morning. And this woman, she's up at all hours. She doesn't go to bed early. And she said the next morning I got up, all the swelling was gone, the redness was gone, I felt fine. In fact, I felt so energetic I cleaned my house. And, when I found out about the right time, it was exactly the right time. So I knew this woman did not know. This is beyond the placebo effect because she did not know what I was doing. But I did realize that you don't send an hour to an 80-some-year-old woman. Totally knocked her out. So how do we do this? Okay. So it's much like radionics. We send healing long distance by either using a photo Or, remember I said multiples of 3 were very important in the energetic world? We put their name 3 times. That's what my guides told me. 3 times put their name, their full name, not the whole string of name, but whatever they go by. Put the crystals on the paper so that they're touching, like an inverted upside down V. Put the music on top so it's resonating the crystals. And then, put in your intent, just whatever, Mary Smith healing or something like that, and send it on its way. You get yourself out of the picture, let the healing, it's sort of like sending a prayer. But it's a very specific prayer. You're telling, what to do, what the information this person specifically needs. So we bring in all of our crystals, big crystals and everything here. That's in my office. We bring in our big generator crystals, and believe me, crystals like to work. You can actually feel them come alive and talk to you. Now, I know I'm talking to crystals, but I never thought I would, but they tell you what they want to do, and they want to help right away. So we found out we can do this for a lot of different things. We could do this for group healing. Okay, everyone holds hands in the group. We've done it for as much as 250 people at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla, California, all nurses, all holding hands. I did something for pain protocol, because all nurses have a pain somewhere, believe me. And so holding hands with the crystals at each end of the circle. And people said, well, aren't I going to get her stuff or his stuff or so forth like that? It neutralizes the stuff, the crystals, as it goes. And sometimes you can feel the energy going around the circle, depending on how strong some of those people are in the group, their energy. You get a group of really powerful women in there. It's like, whoa, it's like very powerful, heady energy. So the power to do this for many, mutual intent and healing. And then we started thinking even bigger than groups. We started thinking globally. Okay, when I first started this, I got chills because, it's those goosies, bumps you get, and immediately you're on the right track because you knew, and my guide said, now you're thinking. All right, what can you do to send healing to the planet? Well, the first time we did this with the Gulf of Mexico. Called in a lot of my practitioners around the world and asked to treat it like a compromised immune system, sending it information for detox and healing and rejuvenation, anything we could get. And of course, it was still leaking at the time, the well. Well, within 2 days after doing this, they capped the well. As soon as we started, of course, I'm not going to take total for this, because I know lots of people were sending energy, but it was kind of curious that it happened 2 days later, only because when Fukushima happened, we did the same thing. And 2 days later, they capped that leak, rods or whatever they were, that were spewing radioactive isotopes into the water and so forth like that. But the oddest thing was, I know there still are messes there. The oddest thing is we were getting calls in the middle of the night from Japan. And these calls were just static. And the reason I say is Japan, because we started to look up the country code. It was obviously an international call. And when I looked it up, the codes were, the area code was coming from the prefecture that was very near the Fukushima site. And I thought, this is odd, but it's just static. Who's calling us from there? So I waited till a time that was on Japan time and called this number. And somebody did answer who did speak some English, and they had no idea why their number was calling our number. Nobody there could possibly have called it, but they called it twice. And so, once could have been an easy mistake, but twice you start to wonder. So we started to think, well, maybe it's just the universe's way of saying, energy received, thank you very much, So then we still continue to use this, especially the United States needs it so much. We've been using it for rain. Now, whenever we use it for rain in California, we get trickles because we know there's other things that are at work that are fighting against us there with HARP and everything else, which we won't get into. California is the agricultural, breadbasket there, so there's some really serious work going on there. So anyway, we can do it to imprint water. I'm watching time, but they said I can go over if I want. Okay. And we haven't even gotten to the good stuff. Okay. And so we can print water by inserting the crystals in liquid, and by some people have inserted in wine bottles using feel-good therapy in there, so they said so you don't get hangovers and to nullify the effects of the alcohol. Well, everybody does their own thing. We do it also into 100% organic oils and so forth. So we also put a little app out there, too, so people could do it on the go, whether it be Android or Apple or so forth. So that's kind of where we were going there. So now I want to get into some really important parts, because Trinfinity 8 is interactive with consciousness. Okay? We call it CAT, Consciousness-Assisted Technology. And my guides always said that your guides, everyone's guides, would know what this was for, just like you can go to any energetic device out there and you know whether it's intuitively, if it's for you or not, resonating-wise. But you would know at a higher level what information was trying to come through to you. And, if you didn't need it, your body wouldn't take it. That was the fail-safe, nice about it. So we started to notice some very strange things happening. People were saying, my mouse is moving by itself on the computer, and it's picking things I normally wouldn't use. Now, at first I thought they were kidding me. Are you joking me? What kind of computer do you have? And but then I started to hear this from other people. And I always said that whatever happened, that it would be a better selection and choice than they would have picked for themselves. Something totally out of the ordinary. So I thought about this whole consciousness-assisted technology and where we're moving into sort of artificial intelligence. Computers are hooking into each other, and they told me computers are now starting to learn your patterns. And I'm not talking about the algorithms put out by Google and Microsoft and everything. They are starting to actually merge with you and anticipate things. We've had a lot of time to learn. They're catching up. But last April, I spent a week in the desert with Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project. And if any of you aren't familiar with him, he's trying to get the whole ET disclosure in the United States, with the military and everything, out into the open. Nice thing is, if you go out into the desert with Stephen, you're going to see UFOs. You're going to see ETs out there, but you're also going to see the military come in and scramble afterwards, trying to get them out of their space. But when I was with him, we were doing remote viewing as well. Now, I had been taught to remote view by Stanford Research Institute by one of the heads of the remote viewing project for the military many years ago, a guy named Russell Tard. I met him at a New Year's Eve party, and he was telling me about remote viewing, and I said, can you teach anybody? And he says, yeah, I can teach you. So he did teach me. But so when I went to see with Dr. Greer, I hadn't done remote viewing for many years, and he said, we're going to remote view out in space, see where you land up. And I landed up outside a planet. And I could see this planet had 2 moons. And immediately I'm thinking, what planet has 2 moons? What planet has 2 moons? I didn't actually even have to, go into my memory banks, because I heard it clear in my head, you're outside Saturn right now. And I was outside Saturn, and outside the Saturn was a huge space station. Huge. I mean huge. Think size of huge city huge. And I could see it, I was inside it, and I could see all these different beings, sort of like, tall, short, all very humanoid, but not human. And they were all working. I mean, it was like a city. They all had jobs and so forth like that. And I could see out this huge bay window that looked to me like a bay window. But I knew that if I was outside the ship looking in, I would not see glass. I would just see some type of polished metal. It was some type of weird fiber optics. And so I'm looking at what's going on in the ship, and I'm drawn over to this one area. And there's what looks like a tubular, some type of circular tubular satellite. At least I thought it was a satellite. And there's all these beings working on it, and I could see these plasma-like rods inside it. And in my mind, I thought, what is that? And as clear as could be, I heard them telling, this is to diffuse weaponry in space. And immediately I thought back to in the 70s when the United States was trying to show Russia how we were scared that they were going to beat us to, into space and the moon, we started shooting rockets up towards the moon. I know, it's crazy. Who would have, why? Anyway, all of these rockets were diffused in space. They never made it, and nobody can ever tell you what the reason was. And immediately I thought, I wonder if these guys diffused those rockets. And then immediately I thought, well, the U.S. would see that this is a weapon that, against them. And immediately I thought, who programs this device? And as clear as could be, they said, no one programs it. It always is able to hook into universal mind, they called it, mind, source, and always knows the right humanitarian thing to do. Now, that's pretty boggling. When you think about that, devices that are assisted by consciousness, and that's where we're going now. Our consciousness is starting to mesh with these things. They have been around for a long time. Now, I won't go into all my ET stories here because that's a whole different lecture, but I did find this later. And they're outside Saturn. NASA, they must have missed this one because usually they hide it. A large objects outside the rings of Saturn, and people tell me, and I couldn't see the rings because they say they're actually invisible if you're up close there. It's only a projection of what we see here. So this was taken from the Hubble. When I came out of this remote viewing, there was other people with Dr. Stephen Greer and I said, maybe I'm not going to say anything about this because was it my imagination that I had this experience, or did I really remote view it? So I kind of kept it to myself until the next day when he started talking about consciousness-assisted technology, and I thought, well, maybe this is a time to bring it up. So I told them about this experience on Saturn and the space station, and Dr. Greer got very quiet. And he said, I want you all to listen to exactly what Kathy has said. I have remote viewed that station. I can tell you, and he described the inside of it down to a T, like what I had saw. He said about 12 years ago, the military discovered this space station parked outside Saturn, and they just freaked them out, and you won't see these pictures. So I said, this one I had to search high and low for. It must have escaped them, but there's something right there. They probably just said, oh, it's just some object, but not actually there. So we are not alone. And these beings out there, some of them are actually trying to help us, except they see us on Earth playing like kids playing with dynamite and being, trying to be the good parent and having compassion for us. But lots of this stuff goes back even farther. The ancient sacred Vedas, they date back to before 2500 BC. And Veda is the Sanskrit word which means to know or knowledge. It's known as the eternal law, beyond human origins. And it contains instructions on the universe and many of the mysteries of life, from mathematics to science to the creation of the universe, astronomy, astrology, future predictions, military weapons, much, much more. The Vedic literature is written in the Mahabharata, and the oral tradition was led to actually putting it down into written format thousands of years ago. Well, the interesting things, it talks about vimanas, it talks about actually uses the word airplanes, exact word, it talks about atomic energy, it talks about DNA. And Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb, they all studied the Vedas. We are rediscovering lost knowledge, lost technology, lost teaching. The real knowledge is truth, and that does not change. So today I said we are relearning what the ancients already learned. I think Trinfinity 8 is what I'm going to show you now. Is just another reincarnation of these lost sciences and devices. In fact, I had somebody who said, oh, how Atlantean of you. They said, I never didn't think I'd see this technology again for a couple lifetimes. It's in a different package, but it's the same thing. We had something very similar back there thousands and thousands of years ago. So last November, I was in Egypt, leading another group to Egypt this November, and this is at the Saqqara, the oldest step pyramid at Dozier. If any of you have ever read the book Elizabeth Haish's Initiation, This is the place that she talked about the initiates actually working. The guards want to chase you away. They want you to look at the step pyramid, but they don't want you to go back here and look at these temples, because here these are sound healing chambers. In the house of what they call the spirit, these are open-aired, high-walled piezoelectric chambers that are calibrated to resonate at 2 frequencies within the range of the baritone voice that generates a beat frequency of 1.45 hertz. That's the human heartbeat rhythm. And the guy who did our DNA studies found that the DNA resonated most highly at anywhere between 1.42 and 1.45. And I didn't know this at the time. And when I saw this, I said, oh my God, that's in the same frequency range of DNA repair. So what healers would do in this temple of spirit was they'd place their heads into small niches opposite the diagnostic platforms, and which were placed at kind of nodal points within the architecture. And that enabled the healer to remotely perceive the doshic imbalances in the patient. And this is how biorhythmic resonance was established and maintained between the ancient healer and the patient. So these practices, like those used in the House of Spirit, were also used in the interior chambers of the pyramids and other distant megalithic monuments. And this unified resonant healing system was applied throughout all the world's sacred sites. They comprise a global, vast network designed to enhance human longevity. So my guides told me that sound is the key to raising consciousness and the physical vibrations that are necessary for restorative health. So when I was there, I saw these strange basins in Egypt at all these megalithic sites and wondered what they were, and nobody had any explanation for what they were. But my guides told me they were piezoelectric basins for acoustic levitation. Okay, they're limestone bowls, basins with circular concaves, and they were found near key pyramids, and they do look like sinks. Although they would say that it must have been for human sacrifices, and then the blood would come out these little holes. But I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. You'd have to have blood all the way raised to here for the blood to come out. What were these holes up here for? And they didn't have holes in the middle for drainage or anything like that. And these are actually kind of like the ancient acoustic sound bowls, like we use our crystal bowls. And there was a very similar one found at Cordell Castle in Homestead, Florida. Remember that big castle, the mystery, how did this guy move all these rocks and everything? Well, they all had notches around too in the cave. And so they would resonate these bowls one after another, and it create this huge sound. And the sound were also able to create were these actually anti-gravity devices, and also used as mass tools for healing. But yes, they're kind of all the stuff that's left behind and just scattered around, and we don't know what they are, and there's some really interesting stuff out there, and we're slowly discovering it. So it's kind of nice. My guides were kind of tuning into some of this stuff and giving me some information. Okay, and our crystals, this is very much similar to the rods of Ra or the wands of Horus, the cylinders were, the right hand was made of copper, the left hand was made of zinc, and one was sun, which was yang, one was moon, which was yin, and inside the cylinders was a special crystal, and with some kind of lattice structure that was very similar to quartz. And these cylinders had a positive effect on a person's energy channels and helped activate them. So as the transformational process began and it commenced, larger grain quartzite crystals were put inside these rods, okay, and then added to the cylinders. And these cylinders, by the way, were also produced in the proportions of the golden mean, the section. Their dimensions were determined on the basis of the state of the given person's energy system and health, and the task being pursued. So many of these were used mostly by the pharaohs, priests, and so forth to improve and perfect their nervous and energetic system, physical systems, kind of like immune system. and enabled the pharaoh then to have what they called intercourse with the gods. They're often referred to these cylinders as the energy source. And one thing, going back to Saqqara, that a lot of people don't know, and I'm telling you some stuff, I mean, this you might have run across, but at Saqqara was where the true initiates learned. And before Osiris, the god Osiris, everybody talks about that, he was part of the Trinity, by the way, which Catholicism and other Christianity is developed the Trinity. There was the creator god Ptah, there was Sokar, and Osiris. And Ptah preceded Osiris. And this Trinity was very, very powerful, all in one. And they had rods, which they called the rods of Ptah. And these rods were, the initiates used them and learned how to use these rods to use earth energies and what today would look like magic. So that's all been lost as well. Okay, so let's get back to crystals for a minute, because the making of a living crystal for consciousness was a priestly function back then. Okay? So I must have led some life, some priests, I don't know. So the crystals were not made in factories, like we tend to think of production today, but were grown carefully and slowly with absolute stillness of concentration by those who had the mental powers and the training to work with these raw crystals. These were different. There were different grades of these living crystals. On the low end, there was the basic record-keeping type. These were the easiest to make, and, they had more use of them, but they were fragile, they were small, they easily broke, prone to damage, and so forth. And among the higher grades of these living crystals were communication-type crystals. These were the highest forms of type, and they got their name. Those used to embed, they were used to embed a living consciousness. So the obelisk you see up there was seen as a communication device between the gods as well. The ancient Egyptians, they usually erected these in pairs, although sometimes you'll see one, but usually in their sacred areas in twos. They're associated with the rays of the sun. And a guide told me that's why my crystals needed to be terminated at just like like a pyramid top on top of the shaft of like the obelisk. They said that four-sided and the top would have the energies of the pyramids in. Okay, so just like the ancient obelisk. All right, so we often suggest that the pyramids of Giza, the plateau of Giza actually, looks much like the layout of a computer motherboard, with appropriate energy and informational circuits and so forth like that. And as I said before, my guides told me that they did have computer-like devices back then, thousands of years ago. We have stumbled across some of them, but we don't know what they are. And we don't have the keys to activate them. And most of them would be activated by consciousness, okay, at least the higher forming ones. And but in time we will learn. And I thought that's interesting because, well, maybe they had computers around there too. This is ancient Greece, 100 BC. This gravestone was found in an ancient Greek monument, and it's displayed in the Getty Museum, the Getty Villa, which is very close to my home in Malibu, California. And they kind of wonder, are those USB ports there? That's kind of funny because nothing ever was broken off about there. You can see here, USB ports. Or was it a jewelry box or something? But if it was a jewelry box, there's not much place to put the jewelry. So this has left a lot of people stumped what this was. But, it does look suspiciously like our technology today, unless it was a time traveler from the future brought back something, to there. Anyway, it gives us much to think about rediscovering and putting all these things back into place. So I'm watching time, I know. This is really an incredible time to be alive. I know we're going through a lot of major shifts, and it's probably going to be a little bit hairier before it actually turns better. But we all chose to be here at this time. The universe is expanding and it's contracting with what we learn. And, we're all contributing to the whole, or as we've come to know, a return to source. We all started off with source. We kind of had a big burst of growth energy and decided to go out into the universe, all of us as souls of energy, and to have all these experiences on what we call planet Earth, and to bring back all these experiences to Source, which is where we're going, where we'll return there eventually. So we're all in this together. How much you progress is how much I progress. No one's an island unto themselves. We are our one cosmic internet, and with it comes the potential for a lot of different things. So we're all being guided during this journey, and it's exciting to see actually where we're going to go from there. So I'd like to thank all of you for being part of this journey here with me tonight. Don't deluge the Trinfinity table tonight because they're closed up and they're tired. But come visit tomorrow. Try a session, and see for yourself. It's free. And, how often do you get something free? Like a 15, 20, 30-minute session or so forth like that. And that's by Rasuna Alston. That's my Australia person here. And she's in Taunton. That's Inner Glow Health Products. And and you can ask me any questions. I'll be around the, not booth, stall for the next 2 days. And if you have anything that even is outside of that feels weird, I love to hear it because I love weird stuff. So good evening, namaste, and thank you so much for staying awake.